Hello, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome in Pakhuis Zwijger. My name is Puk van Dijk. I will be your host this evening. Tonight, you're at It's All Graphic. Just a quick check, who has been here before on one of the other two It's All Graphics? Not the Pakhuis Zwijger, but one of the programs of It's All Graphic? No, all newbies. Yeah, 1, 2, 3. All right, great. Great to have you all. What is It's All Graphic? Basically, it's a co-production with the Wim Krauwel Institute. What is the Wim Krauwel Institute? It wants to connect the history of graphic design to the topicality of today by programming a mix of, well, the old masters and the young designers working in today's top agencies. And tonight we're gonna talk about the graphic revolution, or at least that's what the program is called tonight. And we're going to talk about education in the broadest sense of the word and how it connects to the life graphic design professionals live in. And what does it actually mean to be a graphic designer in today's world, rapidly changing world? What can we expect in the upcoming years? What role does and can education play? And how can we support current and new hybrid generation of designers? Well, with a fiery entrepreneurial spirit, but also, holding on to their creativeness. Before we commence with the program, I really want a quick check on who we have here tonight. So I'm curious to see who here, if we're talking about education, is still a student. Please raise your hand so I can see. Okay, well, that's pretty much great. And wait, let me just rephrase the question. Who here sees himself or herself as a student? It's a different question. A lot more hands. Great. Who here has, just finished studying, say, no more than 3 years? So you're kind of a young, starting professional. Not studying anymore, but yeah, okay, cool. And who's working on a career for at least 15 years? A senior. Okay, good. And then finally, and this is a kind of a trick question, so think about it before you raise your hand. Who here sees themselves as an educator? All right, that's a lot of people. Great. Well, we've invited 5 guests tonight here with us to basically give us different perspectives on the questions that I just mentioned before. And at the end, we will bring them all together on the cozy couch here to bring together these perspectives in an open discussion. And I call it an open discussion because I really want you guys to join as well. So I'll be asking them questions, but also asking you questions, and feel free to ask them questions as well. Great. Good. Now for the commencing of the program. Our first guest, who I want to invite, was the maker of the documentary that was shown earlier this evening, The New Design Landscape. Who was here to check it out? It started at 7. Great, good to see. Who here has seen it, but wasn't here tonight? Okay, cool. For those who hasn't seen it, don't worry, we're not gonna, really dive deep into detail, but we're gonna talk about the thoughts behind the documentary. I'm going to invite Erwin Slegers, who is the head of the graphic design department at HKU, the University of the Arts in Utrecht. And in 2015, he made this documentary, The New Design Landscape. And it's a documentary that kind of sparks the discussion about the graphic design profession and the future of education in this field. So please give a warm applause for Erwin Slegers. Hello,
Thank you
Erwin.
very much for this introduction.
You're welcome. So, Erwin, for those who don't know you, can you tell us what you do in daily life? Because I just called out your title, but what does it mean? What do you do?
In that perspective, I call myself, I still work as a designer, but I design societies of education. That's how I look to it. So, with a point of view as a designer, I work on the art school, and you give more or less you try to point them ways to learn, point them ways to work with each other, even the teachers, point them ways to connect with each other.
Okay, cool. And so how does your day look like? You arrive at the HKU in Utrecht and you...
Everybody jumps up.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Because you're the boss.
When I come in.
Right.
Because there's the boss.
Yeah.
And I keep it down, you know? So what I actually do is I try to sit in the middle of it. To sit in the middle of discussions with students, with young people who are just arrived in the art school, who even don't have a clue what they're going to do in practice. And listen. I think one of the most important things of a head of a department is listen. Listen to your students, listen to the people you work with. And building out of what you realize, building out of team.
Yeah.
Teamwork, teams in students and teams in teachers.
Great. And so 3 years ago, you decided not to only steer people towards, a certain view or help them think about that, but you also took that kind of out of the classroom and out of the education sphere, and you made this documentary I just spoke about, The New Design Landscape. So can you tell us a little bit on what was the trigger for you to kind of start the research for this documentary?
Yeah, once I was working, I think, for almost 7-8 years in the art school, 1 day a week. I just came and leave the art school, and give my lessons. And when I became head of the department, I thought, how is the relation between the outside world and the art school itself? And is this relation still compatible? And when I was looking to what's going on in the outside world, I saw that the real practice of graphic design was changing so much that the way we educate people was destructive for their career. So
in which sense?
Because there was no connection anymore with the outside world. It was too old-fashioned in a way. So I feel the need to ask questions about where we're going through. And that was the whole idea after the film I made. Asking questions, where should we go with each other? What are the next step? And in that question, not only questioning the students, but also questioning the people you work with, questioning your colleagues. Give me this bright idea to put it into a film.
And if I recall it well, at that time you yourself were a student as well. You were studying your master's.
Yeah, my master thesis. Yeah.
So this film was also part of that master's?
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. The art school asked me to finalize my master's. I was starting years ago. I stopped, and they asked me, "Would you like to finalize it?" And immediately I came with this idea to just make a mirror in a way.
Yeah. All right. So let's dive a little bit into what the documentary tells us, or what the people in the documentary tells us, and what you want to tell us with the documentary. So basically, you're talking about this new reality, I guess, that designers have to relate to in a way. But what is that new reality exactly? Because we can all have our ideas about that, but what do you think is the new reality?
One of the new realities is that to become a designer is not a matter of working out of your own ego and make an ego document, because you have to work together. In this time schedule, graphic design is working together, making plans together, talking a lot with colleagues, interaction. So I think that's one of the biggest change who came to us in the last years. Yeah.
And so also, what are the implications then, if that is one of the biggest changes, I guess, that you saw? What are the implications for education in general? And this is where I want to show you guys a short clip of the documentary. Let's see if we have it at hand.
Ook ontwerpstudenten hebben te maken met een hybridisering van hun werkpraktijk, waarin de diversiteit van rollen een belangrijke component van betekenis is geworden. Welke keuze zal het onderwijs moeten maken om deze beweging te vertalen naar hun studentenpopulatie? Is dat een combinatie tussen technologische ontwikkeling en het ambachtelijk vakmanschap? Of bewegen we ons meer richting conditional design? En staan we hiermee aan de vooravond van het vloeibaar ontwerpen?
Okay, so conditional design, fluid design, what is that?
What is he talking about?
What is he talking about? Tell us.
Tell us. It's just an idea, or it's not just an idea. I think when you try to give young designers a platform in working nowadays, they have to know that they should not design only posters or printing, but they have to design systems. They have to innovate. They have to see what's going on in the world and try to connect people with each other. And this is a totally other way of thinking out of perspective of graphic design. It changed the total background of where we came from.
And this is also what they were talking about, this kind of hybrid designer that doesn't only design, whatever images or fonts or whatever, but hybrid in the sense that they have the ability to combine all these different skills. Is that what I can understand with
I think it one step further. I think designers are able nowadays to rethink projects or doing making proposals, and with these proposals they go to for example Motorola, and they present their proposal and they said this is how you should look to the world. The other way around, I think it's less than 5 years ago, we had the time that the designer was waiting for his client on his bureau till he gets an assignment from the client.
So a kind of passiveness.
This world is totally upside down in a way. And actually, if we not responded in the art schools on this particular way of working, the study is nothing anymore. So there was the urgency also for me to make this film.
Right.
Yeah.
By the way, if you guys have any questions, I have a few more left, and then there's time for you. So write them down, keep them in your head, whatever. We'll have time for you guys as well. I just want to quickly go to a little quote that was somewhere at the end of the documentary where I heard you say something about the death of art school. Like, if we don't change, we'll die, right? So if we don't change this arts education system and adapt to what the world asks of us, it's finished with us. How is that? How are your thoughts on that now? Because this was 3 years ago.
Yeah.
Has it changed? Did you adapt?
It changed, but it changed very, very slow. And out of my perspective, it changed too slow. And big institutes as art schools nowadays are they're not able to change that fast. Because
why not?
They're an institute.
They're too big, too bureaucratic, or...
Yeah, too bureaucratic, too afraid to do something what's not common, what not have common sense. So in that perspective, I still believe that the art school, if they go on like this, they will be gone in 5 or 10 years. And we will have another way of teaching. And you can see it, because companies are starting teaching, all kinds of different institutes who doesn't have anything to do with education, starting to educate people by their own in very small communities. And I think there is the strong future of education in a way. And if I may, I think the perspective of having art education has to have a breakthrough, to break open. And I believe that we even can do that without buildings, without overhead, but only with a strong people who believes in what they do traveling around the world with each other, interfering in institutes who open up their curriculum as a way of future thinking of education. Curricula are totally blocked off from the outside world. And I will see if we can change that in 5 years' time to open up curricula for 50%. We doesn't give the teachers time or place to teach there anymore, but they should start to experiment things.
In the field. So a kind of mobile, worldwide teacher, I guess, traveling around the world. Guys, if you
it's
have
a nomadic
a kind of nomadic existence, do you guys have any questions for Erwin? Please raise your hand because I'll sprint to you. He will be here in the panel discussion later. So if you don't, well, maybe you will have it during the evening and you'll be back. So we will talk to you again. Thank you for now, Erwin Zwijger.
Thank you very much.
We invited actually 2 people to do a short presentation. First off, it's Silvio Lorusso, and he's going to talk about the entreprecariat. Now, what is the entreprecariat? I have no idea. We're about to find out. But it has something to do with the relationship between entrepreneurship and precarity. And after it, we have some time for questions. So give it up for Silvio Lorusso.
Hello, hello. Gonna grab this commander. And well, of course, first of all, I'd like to thank you all for being here. And well, I couldn't resist not to use all the possible screens as a graphic designer. And I'd like to thank the Pakhuis for inviting me. I also would like to excuse myself because I won't speak too much about graphic design tonight. But I would like to start by sort of highlighting some keywords that derive from the very introduction to this event that you might have read since you are here. So the idea of lifelong learning, this need of constant evolution, the perspective on disruptive markets, the necessity of a new set of skills, the fluidity and responsivity that we just heard about, the hybridity, and finally this idea of the entrepreneurial spirit. And this kind of keywords are really like my most urgent concern. In fact, I write on a blog which is as was already introduced, called Entreprecariat, which again stands for this relationship, which I will try to explain tonight, between like these two atmospheric pressure, let's say, like the need of being an entrepreneur and let's say growing precarious condition. But tonight I would like to focus more on this idea of entrepreneurship. For me, like the question of entrepreneurship is really like an enigma. So as you see here, like there are many different people coming from different backgrounds, different cultural and social backgrounds, and they are all somehow defined, among other things, for the fact of being entrepreneurs. No, so in a way they become also role models, and what it means nowadays to become an entrepreneur. Of course, like the technological field had played a big role, and of course we cannot avoid to consider like 2 main figures, which are of course like Bill Gates and Steve Jobs, which are framed by the media and by the public discourse as both as rebels. At least they were. Like Bill Gates was a rebel in relationship to the corporate culture of IBM, and ironically, Steve Jobs became a rebel towards the corporate culture of Microsoft. And nowadays, you could find a lot of questions, like for example on Quora, about these 2 cultish figures and the way to become somehow like them. So tips on how many hours Steve Jobs would sleep, or Bill Gates would, how many meals a day Bill Gates would have. And this kind of what I would call a sort of entrepreneurial colonization doesn't only involve adults, but you can see it in things like this. This is, of course, a cherry-picked example, so bear with me. So it's a new magazine, which is, of course, targeted at young girl teenagers, and the goal is to transform them into entrepreneur by using their own brand, by building their own brand on YouTube, on Sketch, for example. Something that adds up to this is also this idea of entertainment, so entrepreneurial entertainment with formats like The Apprentice, Shark Tank, Planet of the Apps, which all derive from this Japanese format called Tigers of Money, which was really humiliating in a way, because people will go there and beg for money to investors. So what we see through this kind of format is this idea of performative pedagogy, this idea that we learn to perform a certain role in society, no? So how does entrepreneurship, which is an actual practice, becomes a sort of ideology? I'm going to quickly try to do a journey into the history of entrepreneurship, and sorry if I have to go very back in time. This young lad that you see here is like an extremely important economist, Joseph Schumpeter, Viennese, and is mostly famous for this concept of creative destruction. So the idea that basically the evolution of society is not so much based on improvement and optimization, but on constant destruction of institution and organization that creates new ones. No? At the same time, Joseph Schumpeter, when he was really young, he came up with this idea of Unternehmergeist, which literally means entrepreneurial spirit. It's interesting to see how the young Schumpeter used to see society at the time. So he actually had this idea of a very pyramidally structured society, in which at the very bottom there was like an hedonist mass that was too busy not to die, not to perish, in order to come up with inventions. In the second layer, we had inventors, of course, a minority that had like a more acute intelligence, so they were able to combine goods and services to come up with new ones. And finally, a very tiny small minorities of men of action that would be able to take advantage of both the other step of the pyramid. In Schumpeter's term, like the entrepreneur is really an heroic kind of role. So it's someone who amend the text, someone who faces risk without timidity, as it says here. And he was really prescient at the time, and we are speaking of 1911. So he understood already at the time that the feature of life of the entrepreneur gained some sort of universality. So we all, which is kind of paradoxical, because we have this very special role that becomes a standard for everybody else. So jumping in time, doing fast forward to the 80s, we have Peter Drucker, which was a guru of management. And he was, of course, a follower of the ideas of Schumpeter, but at the same time he tried to extend it by proposing this idea of the entrepreneurial society. And again, in his idea, like the entrepreneur was a rebel, was someone who would upset and disorganize, a bit like an artist, a bit like a designer in the ways we see nowadays. And his suggestion for improving society was to transform it by transforming everybody in innovators and entrepreneurs, filled with entrepreneurial values. No? And how to do this? So, of course, like he was suggesting to familiarize citizens with the idea of flexibility, of continuous learning, and acceptance of change as normal. How to do this? By also destroying the welfare system and permanent jobs. Why doing that? Because of course, like the permanent job and the stability of a contract would prevent people to innovate because they wouldn't have the incentive to do so. So this is, for me, it's really interesting to see how much the Peter Drucker dream became somehow reality. So it became so much reality that many entrepreneurs now look back at the origin of the species and say that all human beings are entrepreneurs. This is by Reid Hoffman, which is the founder of LinkedIn. So basically, they were all entrepreneurs all the time, no? And finally, entrepreneurship somehow invades the very space of the mind with the ideas of Jeffrey Timmons, which was a professor at Harvard School of Economy. And here it provides a nice portrait of the entrepreneur based on his study on the successful ones in his own specific context of Harvard as well. So what are the common attitudes? This idea of working hard, this idea of intense commitment or work ethic, this idea of burning with competitive desire to excel and win, and to use failure in a positive way. And also, going back to the magazine, we see that this really becomes naturalized in many ways, this idea of entrepreneurial spirit, entrepreneur gene, and even in form of a Lombrosian phrenology, in which like the most important part of our mind becomes or at least of the entrepreneur becomes to create our own reality. So to conclude this short excursus within like the entrepreneurial spirit, I want to show how in popular culture entrepreneurialism becomes a matter of common sense. You might know this meme. Which is a so-called exploitable meme. So there is a common structure and everybody can change it and add his own like version of it. So what is the inner logic of the meme Be Like Bill? So Bill is like an average man that does things in a very, following his common sense, following an etiquette, like doing what is right. So, for example, Bill is on the internet. Bill is smart. Bill sees something that offends him. It doesn't comment, so it doesn't get into a flame. After some time, a meme was done based on that structure, and the protagonist was Elon Musk. And it's very interesting how the logic of common sense was translated to Elon Musk. So it's all based on the power of will. So Elon Musk wanted a new payment method on the internet, so he created PayPal, etc., etc. And the two final lines are very interesting to me because they also suggest an attitude towards the world. So Elon doesn't not tell everyone how bad the world is. He doesn't complain, no? Elon is a man of action. He's working on changing the world. To conclude, I want just to go back a bit quickly on this word to see how much they are not neutral and they can also provide some sort of incentive not to change the world around us. And of course, I like to add some sort of responsibility toward the designer themselves rather than the structural political condition around them. Yeah, so I wanted to conclude here. Thank you.
Okay. Great.
Yeah, sure.
Are there any questions from you guys? Please raise your hand. No? Are you sure? No one? Okay, I do.
Yeah.
I do.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, well, so basically, I'm still trying to kind of get my mind on the last part you've been telling. So you might have to do it again for me. I'm kind of slow. But what I did kind of try to grasp is the entrepreneurial spirit that was laid out by the historical figures in your presentation, right? And it seems to me as though there was kind of an kind of an overlay, or it seems as though there was a parallel with which Erwin told us before, that, you know, this kind of designer or design education should be very fluid. nomadic all over the world. And it seems as though the teachers he was describing are kind of these old school entrepreneurial geniuses that you described. Do I see a parallel there, or is that not true?
I'm not sure if the parallel is so direct, but what I can say maybe what are my thoughts while watching the documentary is that let's say a certain attitude toward design, a certain autonomy that the Dutch design is very famous for, really also derive from certain material conditions that are specific to this country. So when I think of nomadic designer, I think of many people who come to the Netherlands to develop a certain attitude, which you might call entrepreneurial spirit, but then they maybe try to develop a practice back in their own countries. And that is not necessarily so easy because basically what I want to say is that an attitude, an entrepreneurial spirit really depends on the context in which you are embedded. And that's why my suggestion is somehow to consider it not as something that derives from personality as I show, or based on gene, on DNA, but something that is really relational and involves economical layers, social layer, cultural layers.
And so, because I've heard you've only lived 2 years here in the Netherlands, if I'm right, a bit more, but still relatively an outsider to the Dutch culture, which is also an interesting point of view, because you have this kind of fresh look on how we interpreted this kind of entrepreneurial role. Can you tell us a little bit what is so specific about the Dutch idea of entrepreneurship?
Well, this is a big question. I mean, I don't know if there is. I don't know if there is something specific, but I mean, I don't think it's a coincidence that to introduce an event on the future of design, you used exactly the expression of entrepreneurial spirit. So I don't know if it's something specific of the Netherlands, but in my opinion, in my experience, in my empirical experience, this idea of pushing entrepreneurship as a way to address the question of work, because after all, that is the question, is very present, is very pervasive here in the Netherlands. And I would say in Italy, for example, if I have to compare, is a little less. So I don't know if it's really specific, but it's here. Mm-hmm. So that's why I'm interested in that. And,
right. Right. If there's not any questions for now, you will be here also in the panel. So thank you very much for now. Give him a warm applause. Silvio.
Thank you.
As I said before, we've invited 2 designers here to talk about lifelong learning, about entrepreneurship, about education. We're now going to listen to a graphic designer currently still writing her master thesis at the Zwijger Institute here in Amsterdam. And she's here to talk about design, education, and specifically the social issues pertaining to race and class. So give a warm applause for Sharida Kuffour.
Hello, everyone. So as Puk said, I'm a graphic designer at Zwijger at the moment, and I thought I would bring some social kind of commentary on the graphic design conversation. So I'm a graphic designer originally from Holland, but then I lived in the UK for 12 years, so I'm only back for like a year now. But I moved here to do this master's at Zwijger in graphic design, and the first day at Zwijger was like super memorable time for me because I remember how excited I was. I still have like the yellow letter of, acceptance posted on my wall because it was a very exciting time. And I remember the first day that I went and the school hosted like a welcome dinner for all the new students. And so I walked into the room And there were so many languages that I heard, like Portuguese, German, Chinese, whatever. And it was a very multicultural environment. It was a very, like an environment with loads of different people and cultures. And one thing that I noticed was that even though there were so many different variations in culture and nationality, there was no racial diversity at all. There was like me and Nagare, who's sitting in the audience right now, and we were like 2 black students out of like 200 odd students and staff. So this experience of being made aware that I was kind of in the minority made me feel very self-conscious, and I started to, adjust my posture, think about how I spoke to people a lot more. I became a lot more reserved. I made myself a lot smaller. So I wondered if I had been invited to Zwijger for a bureaucratic decision. I wondered if there was someone who was sat in his office oh, we don't have any racial diversity. Let's just throw in some black or, Asian kids in there to make it more even. So today I'm going to be reading a little bit from my thesis about this behavior that I exhibited, both from the institution and then also from myself. So what does it mean to shrink back as a minority student, so to speak? And then what kind of behaviors do I exhibit throughout my studies and how that influences my work? So I'll be looking down a lot just to say that. So basically, I am of the persuasion that art has the ability to be super personal for the creator. It can impact the life and psyche of a lot of artists, but what happens when the production of art is in a discriminatory or socially isolating context? I've experienced a myriad of racial epithets in art institutions, so I'm aware of how spaces like these have the ability to be violent drivers of marginalization. We need to address what the role of the institution is in this instance and what power it holds to cultivate a new culture amongst the students and staff. We also have to examine how Black bodies navigate and take up space, and also how we undo racially charged spaces without necessarily resorting to tokens and quotas. I previously studied in London, as I said, so I'm going to compare these two settings. That's the UK and then the Netherlands, so we can draw conclusions from two countries with similar colonial pasts. Like I said before, I studied graphic design at Ravensbourne, which was a university in South London. And one of my most memorable experiences there relating to this topic was about how so there was 40 of us in a class, or 45, and there was maybe 3 or 4 Black students, and then there was one Indian guy and then 1 Mongolian guy. That was our makeup. And I remember when a friend of mine who's also Black, he said to another friend of ours who was white, as he was photographing his work, he said, "Chris, can I use your hands to photograph my portfolio, because then it would be more acceptable?" Now, this Black guy, a friend of mine, already had a very British sounding name, so the only thing that would give him away, so to speak, was the black hands that he would use to hold the publication. And it was funny because we laughed at this experience, and it was kind of haha, this is what we do in order to be able to get jobs and stuff like this. But it also made me think a lot about the ways that we inhabit, or we have to wear whiteness, so to speak, in order to get jobs or to get internships or anything like this. And even if you Google any publication or on Pinterest, any book, it's always held by white hands. And it's this default that I really started to question at the time. So in one way or another, there was a general consensus amongst the Black people in the group that we had to make ourselves as invisible as possible to get the same job opportunities as our white peers. For example, using a socially white name, one that's not as ethnic, making sure you're gentle or posh and speaking far from any African or Caribbean accent as possible. So the aim in all of our design work was for ultimate neutrality. That to us meant whiteness. The use of white spaces, white cubes, white backgrounds, white hands, Swiss white space, ultimately the assimilation into whiteness ourselves. It was, and I suspect still is the practice of many black artists and designers to reproduce whiteness. In the example I just shared, we can see how certain social norms, such as white neutrality, is organized into common knowledge, a norm that violates diversity. So by common knowledge, I mean as in there's something that we all assume to be normal and default, but then actually is a very violent, it's a very violent reality for people that are non-white. And I also wanted to argue that the white domination of space is constantly being reproduced by both black and white people. So it's not like a thing where, like only one particular race or something is doing it. Like we all do it. It's self-sabotaging, self-depreciating, and anti-black. So by this reproduction, the fact that we all do this and the expense at which it comes, we have to acknowledge that there's a large value in the habit of falling in and out of whiteness. That value is the opportunity for economic gain to be seen as acceptable, as charitable, and as a functioning person of society. For black artists, the value of assimilation or reproduction of whiteness is to receive grants, have work shown in museums, exhibitions, and finally to live in the same spatial ease that white privilege affords white people. So then hosting and reproducing whiteness becomes a survival mechanism necessary to operate safely in a world where skin color is a stumbling block of equal opportunities. So how can we solve this? A lot of institutions have implemented tokens and quotas, and in my opinion, a token is a person who exists because the institution realizes that there is an unfair bias, and so therefore we need to do something about it. So they just throw in a person whose body is more important than, say, the personhood. Quotas, on the other hand, is employ the need for a percentage to be fulfilled. In many institutions that had disproportionately large amounts of white people, the quota was implemented to increase racial diversity, although the quota was by no means restrictive to just race. It also had class, gender, and disability. And for businesses that make use of quotas, there are audits, studies, graphs, and reports to ensure that no information falls through the cracks. Even though it seems very bureaucratic to have something in place like quotas, I think we have to, for me, it's a reality that things like colonialism was a bureaucratic decision. These were made through very pragmatic people and minds and stuff like that. So then the way that we dismantle it needs to be as pragmatic and as calculated as well. In the UK, many universities, such as the one I attended, which was Ravensbourne, actively recruited students from black and lower income areas to fill a percentage of class and racial diversity. What this created was a cultural, racial, and class melting pot, depending, of course, where the university was in London. There were black networks that my university was connected to, such as the Mindful Employee and the Network for Black Professionals. However, although quota allocations ensure accountability on a corporate and institutional level, it's not without its flaws and can still have negative social outcomes. The implication of a quota are that they become quantification tools as evidence of justice. This means that instead of really looking at the relationship between the art institution and the black artist, it becomes a numbers game, where the institution is awarded for merely allowing black artists to exist in its space, but never really deconstructing colonial behaviors. So I'm arguing that it's not just about, we now have 10 black teachers, and we have this many this, and we have this many that. We have to look at the relationship that we have that needs to be repaired right now before we try and recruit more people. And for the black artists, the internal battle that concerns eligibility of taking up space is reoccurring. I remember the feeling of being one of two black people on the first day of Zwijger, and even though I was really excited at first, I was I questioned kind of my position if I was just used as this token or quota, like I said before. And as an artist and designer myself, I use artist and design interchangeably, by the way. I realized that blackness was always constructed to work in polarizing realities, never besetting all facets of the many experiences that exist. I think there's a particular aesthetic that is appreciated by white institutions from black artists, one which often addresses pain, discomfort, and anger. The position of Black people in white institutions then become only to educate through the use of personal traumas, to inspire or act as a revolutionary object by operating in strong violent narratives and never having the privilege to occupy more than one reality. The very presence of being in white institutions become laborious. So how can both the art institution and the Black artists decolonize themselves and behave differently? Is it possible to design a safe space that exists even beyond the people that are part of the institution now? Well, from the perspective of the Black artists, we created a Black student union where we invite speakers to talk, one of them being Gloria Wekker for our next event, and also where we have like internal discussions and about how to really develop our work and how to fix this relationship between the white institution and the Black artists. And I really want to stress that it needs to become a collaboration rather than, one-sided. And I really have hope. I think that the art institution has the power to cultivate a new culture amongst the students and staff, thereby alleviating the labor required of Black artists to decolonize these spaces without centering whiteness in the conversation. I think that the art institution should facilitate, which means not only recruiting more Black students and staff, but actively designing a space to discuss the issues of race. We've all been inflicted with colonialism. For some, it's a distant memory, and for others, its effects remain a daily reality. We have to start the process and the labor required to achieve equality. The way Black people are positioned society, socially and economically disables them to create art in the same vein that white students are able to. So I think it would seem fitting for the art institution to engage with the wider community. I mean, I know a lot of schools are already doing this, but what if we went like 10 times more forth with like going into different areas or really planting itself is a presence that's there, not just for, like art education is more than just learning what tools to use, but also just how we socially go about treating each other. And also can be a commentary on society at the moment. So we have to, so therefore it would seem fitting for the art institution to engage with the wider community, and we have to set physical things in place, things like workshops, things like funds, meetings, all of these type of things. And the responsibility of the art institution where critical thoughts are shaped out and sent into the world must be more diverse to reflect a multicultural and multiracial society. If we are serious about eradicating racist behaviors, then white institutions must provide their bodies, resources, and ears to do so. My position is rooted in the belief that as a democratic society, we must work harder and smarter to ensure that everyone has a fair and equal chance to be present and represented in public space, and by extension, of course, education, which operates as a public space. Thank you.
Are there any questions for Sharita? Yes, just a moment. Coming up with the mic.
What do you think it's like being in London, which is a much more culturally diverse city, and studying there, and then coming here, which is less so? And how that, did you see a massive difference, or did you actually think that it was pretty similar, or what do you think the dynamic was like?
I think the experience of being in London and then also in the Netherlands is what inspired me to write this thesis, because it was such like a culture shock, because I felt that in London, wherever I went, was super diverse, and then universities really reflected that. So if you went to a lot of universities like Ravensbourne, the one that I went to, or Kingston, there were a lot of people that were also from the area that went there. Whereas when I came here, even though I could see that there were physically, the culture was super, varied, it wasn't reflected in education. And I felt that you got to the age of 15 where it was super multicultural, and then you went higher and then everyone just disappears. So it was this kind of polarizing thing that, that shocked me, kind of.
Yes, another question. Just a moment.
You're explaining a little bit what institutions should change, but do you perhaps also have a suggestion what we as the people that are sitting here right now, the audience, should change in their approach to how do I say it correctly? African American artists, if I phrase it correctly.
So you're saying like here as a general what we can do now, or
just as a person instead of an institution.
Well, I'm not. I really think that the people make up the institution. That I think people are sat here that are like lecturers or tutors and all of these type of things. So I don't think it's necessarily them versus us. But I do think. Yeah, it's a bit difficult. I do think that what I said before, like if you have like a platform, like how can you open that up? Very physical things, because we could start with listening. We could start by saying, okay, we need to listen more to these people, or there needs to be like an outreach program, or I don't know if that answers a little bit. Sorry.
Another question?
I can. Oh, yeah. Hi. Hey, girl. Hey. Just wanted to respond also to the question that you gave, because most of the lectures where we are talking about diversity, always comes the question of like, well, what do you think that we can do? I think like precisely that question you have to. I think because I also study at Zwijger, another department. And I never wanted to do my thesis about diversity. Never. But it really is always the question like, oh, you're black. Oh, so you are doing your work about colonial past. And, cool. And, is it about racism? Only because I'm the only black girl, Wichita, in school. So I think the whole situation about asking from a black student or black colleagues or people, like, what can we do? No, we never created racism. So I think it's also like much further in Dutch education that we have to talk about it and learn about it, not only give it to the students.
Thank you.
Well, I was thinking when listening to you, and I was having an experience. I studied in the UK. I'm Polish, time of Brexit, and I felt that a lot of problems, which are completely different, but I have experienced myself, were actually stemming from a very bizarre gaps in education that, people who are focused on the creative industries, they just stay in that field for many, many years. And they don't have this broader, more holistic picture, like, like there's no link with sociological sciences or history. It's very bizarre. I remember that I thought that probably a lot of problem stems from there as well. I mean, this is my perspective. I don't know what you think about that.
Well, I definitely don't think like design or arts or all these creative sectors, they don't live in a bubble by themselves. I think we like to, in terms of like this mindset of not having like historical references whenever we talk about creativity. You know what I mean? Like,
can you phrase it in a concrete question, maybe?
Oh my God, I'm not sure because I'm improvising.
But you're saying like that there are certain behaviors because of lack of knowledge of historical and social.
No, well, not. Or I think that it really depends on country and maybe a school, but sometimes we would just, it would be too narrowed down perhaps to like, I don't know, people staying in the comfort zones. So then when it would be clashing with some other fields, they would be getting lost. And I think that was also sometimes reflected in the way they would approach some problems in art and cause some problems between people. So yes.
Do you want to reflect on that?
No.
Okay, no, that's cool. I mean, cool. I have one more last question before we're going to wrap up and we're going to go to the panel discussion. Because while you were speaking, we saw some of your work, I guess, surrounding us. And that was very interesting because you said a little bit about that. But how the artist or the designer can also contribute to this kind of paradigm shift in thinking on how to decolonize our education system. Like, for example, can you give us maybe one short example of work you made that kind of issues that? If you have so, or
specifically regarding this that
maybe?
Well, the most obvious one was the video, the first video with the 3 women, and it was more of like a commentary on what was expected of me at Zwijger or at school in terms of always talking about racial topics and stuff. And I forgot your question.
I was wondering on what the role of the artist itself, be that you or be another artist, in the whole, shifting or thinking about colonization, decolonization within the education system.
Yeah. Well, so this project specifically was about taking up space, and it was about really trying to break out of the stereotypes of creating a particular work that always concerned colonial pain or that always concerned things like slavery and things. So this project was almost like a breather for us to remind ourselves that we can be bigger than just the stereotypes that's been imposed on us.
Nice. And how old is this work? Was this from?
This is like 2 weeks old or something.
2 weeks old.
Yeah.
Well, we have a premiere.
It's not even edited yet.
Well, for now, Sharita, thank you very much.
Yes,
give her a warm applause. Great. And I would love to ask our last guest on stage, who is the program director of 72U Amsterdam, Hanneke Metselaar. Please give her a warm applause. Hello, Hanneke, welcome. The others are going to join in a minute. Is it working? Yeah, it's working. Great. But first, really quickly, tell us about who you are and what 72U is.
So yeah, I'm Hanneke Metselaar. I call myself a creative entrepreneur. Yep. Pretty relevant here, I think. I'm the program director of 72U. It's the creative residency program of 72 and Sunny. I think it was born 5 years ago in LA.
72 and Sunny was born in LA.
No, was born in LA, but that's way back. Yeah. 72U
so really
started.
For those who don't know 72 and Sunny.
72 and Sunny is a global agency, idea company. We call ourselves now. I think creative agency. We are a platform for personal growth and creative self-expression. Started in LA, and now we have 5 offices: Amsterdam, Singapore, Sydney. I'm forgetting one.
Amsterdam is the most important one. That's why we're here. And so 72U, what is it exactly?
It's the University of 72 and Sunny. And we created it to create our own talent, but also learn from young creatives. And to understand how this creative world is moving so fast. And basically find our new hybrids, as how we call them, creative hybrids. Mostly also learn from them.
It's actually very interesting if you remember the short interview with Erwin, who also talked about how non-education institutions were also making universities or places for education. And I guess, you are the living example with 72U, right? You're kind of creating a space to learn outside of the formal institutions.
Yeah, we're creating basically a place where we can play, make mistakes. We ran a session in the fall of 2016 and basically are adapting how we are going to do it for the next year. because we found out that a lot of people in the agency also would like to do projects like this. So we recruited 5, 6 people from outside, and the projects that we worked on were so nice that I think a lot of people within the agency also wanted to do these kind of projects. Yeah. So we're amending it a bit. But yeah, these were, I call them my kids, but they really hated it, and I agree with that. So I'm sorry.
So basically, it's a kind of an international studying program, and is it during the whole year, or how does it work?
It started out as a 3-month residency, and we're now making it 1 month. And we are gonna have a club and a class is for younger kids.
How young?
9 to 12.
Oh, really young, young kids.
Because we are under the impression that if you really want to change something in the creative industry, and you have to start with the kids by showing them what the creative industry is. And we focus a lot on kids that would not necessarily walk into a 72 Sunny, or have parents or have friends that understand how this works. So we work with a company called Dynamo to recruit kids in Amsterdam to participate in these programs.
So one of the questions I want to ask all of the guests here, but I'm also very curious on your thoughts about this one tonight. That is actually, what are, I guess, the biggest challenges or challenge for a creative professional nowadays, you know, on the professional road as a designer or as a creative in general? And how can learning or education in the broadest sense of the word play a role in, you know, kind of dealing with these challenges? So I'll start with you. What is the biggest challenge, do you think, for a creative, like one of your kids? And how do you, as an education institute, I guess, kind of, you know, solves this or helps them with?
I think the most important thing is to be flexible.
What do you mean with that?
I think back in the days, a designer would get an assignment and you would go in your room and you would sit there and you work on it. And I think now, yeah, you said a lot about it. It's about collaboration. It's not also your own idea. It's about finding the magic of a collaborative idea. Sorry. And I think that's very difficult because we're very trained and we want to, yeah, we all have an ego. So we all want to say, I made that, that's mine. And when you create something together, it's never only yours. And I think that's something very important for now, for a designer of now.
And do you think it is a challenge for designers now? Are they not flexible enough, I guess?
That I don't know.
No. Okay.
Like I don't. Like I think it's about the educational systems that create these kind of people, because I think you can create that. But it's also in your personality. Some people just are introverts or extroverts. I mean, that's also about who you are. We have a huge discussion in the agency about open workspace. I hate it.
Why?
And now, because I think a lot of people need sometimes
structure.
No,
yeah.
But need to be closed off. But then you also need to open up. So I think it's a big design choice. I think it's a nice task actually to think really about how to create the best creative environment.
I think one of the people in the documentary also mentioned that if we're thinking about education, we should start thinking about how it's shaped. Like literally, like we have classrooms with these, you know, benches in the old-fashioned way or in the U shape, right? We all know that, and it kind of fits us in a certain state of mind. Whilst, you know, the alternative, like flexible workspace, la la la, you know, it's maybe not even the solution, as you say. It should be both. It should be flexible.
Yeah.
Right. Again, like I said, this is a question for you as well. So what are the biggest challenges for you as a creative, for you as a designer, for you as a person working in education maybe? And how can education or learning in general kind of deal with that? So if you have any ideas on that, please raise your hand. I'm very curious to hear, or even just a part of the question, like what are the biggest challenges for you guys at this moment as a designer or an artist? Think about that. While you think about that, I would like to ask the rest of the guests on stage with me, please. Great. Thanks. Yeah. Take a mic, please. Great. Yeah. And I think it should fit the four of you. It's very cozy, like I said before, but it should fit. It should be here. So do you have any ideas on... Well, of course, Erwin, I mean, your documentary is about these challenges. So what for you, if you have to choose, is for now, for your students, the biggest challenge they deal with?
To become really... to know what their self, to become stable, and to be their self, and even in the construction, to work in an open workspace, to know who they are, and how they can breathe and experiment the things around them. So you have to bring them a lot of stability. It's not only talent; it's also the inside of the person who.
And so, if I understand you right, in order to find out who you are, or to develop this kind of knowledge of who you are, you need stability?
Or instability,
yeah.
if it fits. But you have to know what's fitting you.
Yeah.
So, and I think that's the journey you made in 4 years study, to realize what's fitting you the best. Yeah. And if we are able to give that after 4 years, then I'm very happy.
Right. So to learn who you are. I have someone who has been thinking about this question as well.
Thank you. To what extent do you feel like institutions or schools should basically hand a person everything he needs, or in case of entrepreneurial spirit and you have to keep learning even as a professional, to what extent do you feel like it should be a package that's being delivered to you, or just trigger the entrepreneurial spirit and give room to learn for yourself, basically? Because you're gonna have to learn as soon as you quit or you're done with the 4 years, you're not done learning, and sort of learning to be entrepreneurial about your own skills is something that should be taught as well, I think. And that's might be something that makes the room or the improvements to the study or the institutions as well, to sort of make the students think for themselves what they need. What's your thoughts about that?
Entrepreneur?
Silvio?
Should I go with this? Yeah. Well, I don't know. I think this does it work? Yeah. This question, the question of how institution like should put somehow like should teach students how to continue learning allows me like to propose something that is I think it's quite central in my idea of education, and the idea of like problematize the very concept of the design of the self, no? Because like basically what unconsciously we constantly say is that like the emerging designer, the fresh graduate, has to do like this constant reworking on himself or herself, right? I think we should put this aside for one moment and also look like the kind of reworking that should be done around the single designer, the single individual, and in terms of institution. So in order to do this, I think it's very important, even if we are speaking about design, to go beyond the specificity of a practice that's actually lost its specificity. So the question, so it's basically what is needed is also like to see somehow education, not necessarily from the perspective of excellence. I mean, we always sort of aim to excellence when we are like within education. I think a sort of look into what is not considered excellence. I mean, I speak of like this idea of designer without qualities. No, like what is the daily activity of like designers who are not like in the most important books or shows. I think it gives us a really interesting look. For example, in your documentary, there was like this this designer saying that in 10 years all the dull job were going to be automated. I think like the documentary was shot not this like a few years ago. Yeah. So for me it was really interesting to hear this, because one of the dull jobs that is still performed nowadays is exactly graphic design in many instances. And I'm not, of course, like speaking of Zwijger, for example. So I think like that kind of relationship with reality is very important to understand like the limit and the boundary of our practice.
And it also kind of raises the question that you were talking about as well, like in which way is the education system itself the place where you have to learn everything, right, from scratch, and especially also thinking about the creative as entrepreneur, which is what you were talking about. Like, should we expect everything from our arts education, or should there be more of these kind of 72U places where those specific things are there to, develop us through? What do you think, Hanneke?
I think in every art school there should be ondernemerschap.
Entrepreneurships.
I think courses. It is ridiculous that that's not really done.
Why should it be
Because that's how the world is. That's how the society. They're all set payers, and if you don't understand how it works.
I'm just checking with you, anyway. Sharita, because you are still studying, even though it's a master's. I'm not sure. Is there any attention for that part of the craft, I guess?
Well, I think it depends on the context, because in London, the university that I went to, there was a very close relationship between the industry and then the educational world. But then what this created was just our curriculums were then based on the trends that were going on in the industry. So then it just meant that we were like swept away with whatever aesthetic that was going on at the moment, because that is what would make you employable. So I definitely do think that we should look at what's happening in industry, but then also be comfortable in making these trends happen.
Yeah. But that's not what I meant. I meant very practical. Like, understand what entrepreneurship is, like, because, what's an enterprise? How does it work? How do you sell yourself? How do you calculate what something costs? I mean, I'm just very stupid and very simple. But you become an artist. But in this world, an artist also needs to understand how to file taxes, otherwise. And I'm surprised that that's not. Because the world asks for that.
Yeah.
Anyway.
I'm just curious on Erwin's thoughts on this.
We do, actually. It's deeply involved in the studies now. So, but we learn a lot, because in the art schools was also we looked away from it for a long time, actually, and because we were particular people who want to design or to be with art and not with entrepreneurship. But now we know we can. I cannot think of those to be loose of each other. So, yeah.
Any more? Yeah, there's a question right there. Just a moment.
It's not so much a question. I think that if you talk about the graphic revolution and what's happening there, that not only the art schools have the solution. What's the future of graphic design? That also, for instance, sociology or economic, or that in all different fields of education, the creative industry should be a part. And then you don't only focus on the designer itself. So that's my idea. So, like the Wim Krauwel Institute has on the University of Amsterdam a fellowship, we should do those kinds of things to bring the work of designers farther.
And just to follow up on that, like this idea that the designer has to be every and anything, I think that actually there's much more quality in working with people in other places and things. So if you can't file your taxes, can you work with someone who can help you file your taxes? Or if you want to make a film, but you do work with like filmmakers, so then we expand our pool rather than kind of existing in a bubble.
So it seems almost as though, because, there's a reason why tonight was called, it has the word revolution in it, right? So it seems as though you are all talking about kind of revolutionizing education in a way, changing it. But on a critical note, this is what we've been, this is what education does, right? Because we always talk about change and that it should be different. And maybe in the 70s, there were like a lot of changes in the way we think about education. Why do you think now in this age we're talking about this again? Why is it coming up? What tells us about designers? What tells us about the world designers live in? Let's start with maybe you, Erwin.
Out of my perspective, I think the whole journey we make with new technology, for example, ask us new questions who we have to integrate in education again. So we have to question ourselves again. Yeah. It's one example. There are many more. I think the diversity of our country, or the things you talk about, new questions are on the table. And I don't think that education has to solve all those questions, but we just have to we have to talk about it with our young students.
Yeah. Silvio, I saw you nodding.
Maybe what I can say about this is that I have like a feeling that the constant, the notion of revolution and change is basically like the default. So it's for example, if we consider the notion of multidisciplinarity, which is commonly proposed as a goal, no? I would say that in reality, or in some level of the design profession, multidisciplinarity is really a curse rather than a blessing. So most of the people I know that study design do 3-4 jobs at the same time, and of course they thrive in this diversity and this change. But at the same time, after 5 years, the stamina sometimes goes really low. So what I'm saying is not to deny the quality of revolution, of change, but also to make a step back and paradoxically make education something that is reactionary rather than progressive in this default sense. So maybe that would be the real progressive stance.
Hanneke?
No, I like it a lot, and I think it goes back to what you said before, that education should be about self-knowledge. Mm-hmm. It should be about learning who you are, and with that you know how you react on certain situations, and just giving all the tools to react in the right way. I think that's exactly right what you said. I'm not saying that everybody needs to know how to file taxes, but if you can't, then know that you have to find somebody that can help you. I think that's.
And so finally, I think Sharita, since you are here representing also students, do you feel that you are in a place, or you've been in places, in educational places in general, where you could find yourself, find who you are, and be also able to find the things you need when you need them?
Yes, definitely. Yeah.
How so?
Well, I think it's mostly depended on the people that were on my courses with me, and how they were able to lend themselves or their skills to whatever you needed or what skills you could also give. So I think it's definitely been helpful in that sense, in also developing yourself or realizing where your talents or passions lie in order to kind of form a collective or be part of some kind of commons.
We're going to wrap up, but there's a few questions which I would like to attend. Let's see.
Hi. You asked us before whom of us is an educator, right? And I would like to come back to that because I think we can all agree that education is the key to making a better next generation. But who is there to educate us, the educators, of how to teach the students to find out who they are? Because I was teaching for a while at the KBK, for example, and I realized that since I had a more traditional education myself, I kind of automatically reflected out onto the students, and I couldn't give them what the institution was asking from me, right? And I was thinking, who can teach me to do that? Like, I'm still figuring out myself. And the guys who did figure it out, they were like super young, and they didn't know how to teach. So you have like this weird stuff going on.
Sylvia? Or Erwin? Yeah, Erwin?
So the answer, I don't know if I have the total answer, but I think as working to a society of students, you also have to work to the society of teachers. And teachers have to become a society and have to work together in a way to learn from each other. Because it's not a matter of that we put a teacher on the class and think that he will represent the whole world. So in that perspective, we try, or what I try in my society is to let the teachers make a community by themselves and have talks and try to go on with teaching, but learning from each other how they teach and what kind of ways they can teach, and they can sharpen their mind by themselves. So,
all right, for our final question.
This is for Sharida. So I was wondering, do you think in this discussion there's been a lot of talk about giving students like time to work out who they are, but do you think the tutor should bear in mind white privilege when they teach this to other students?
Yes. Right? Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
They should. They should bear that in mind. Yeah. And I think one of the things I heard also with 72U is that diversity is like at the basic level of the program. Like that's the starting point. Am I right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and realizing that you're a role model, but also realizing that because of this white privilege that exists and that's all around us, and if we don't say this, it's stupid, that because of that, we have different role models. And by creating the right role models for everybody, we're also going to create the world, change the world in that way. So that's exactly also what you're saying about having art that's created by more black people, but also having more educators being. And I think this time you're again. There's two black people sitting here, so we need to be, but we need to be aware of it. And I think in Holland, and that was to your credit, in the UK, it's all different. Here we don't talk about it. I don't know. It's like it's weird.
It seems as though, just wrapping up for tonight, we need to kind of revolutionize the way we think about race. I guess the way we think about entrepreneurship.
Yeah, but also be honest about how it is.
Yeah, be honest about that, but also revolutionize the way we deal with students, I guess, and the kind of the formal. Classical way we deal with students, and the way we, the freedom it needs to develop yourself, because that's something I heard multiple times with you as well. I want to thank you, guests, a lot for being here tonight, be so open and talk about this complex area, I guess, because education is so broad, it could go anywhere, but it's great to have your contribution here tonight. I want to thank you guys for being here as well, and also for contributing. I want to thank the Wim Krauw Institute for organizing this with us tonight. I would like to remind you guys to please do not forget the pay-as-you-like principle we have here at Pakhuis Zwijger, if you like this evening or evenings like this. And also, maybe we have a slide of one of the upcoming events, or some of the upcoming events. Yeah, there you go. Oh, sorry, we still have a column. Oh my gosh, I was wrapping up. No, I'm so sorry. We still have one column left. I'm so sorry. You guys can take a seat. Oh, I'm so sorry. Frederik Huygen, please come up. You are wrapping up, yes. Sorry. I just want to introduce you well, because I didn't just now. You are a fellow, something that you were talking about earlier, at the Wim Krauw Institute, and you are specialized in the history of Dutch design. And we ask you, especially Frederik, to reflect shortly on, well, basically what we've been talking about tonight, and also give this kind of personal
I'll
note
be
to
quick.
it.
It's a column.
Thank you so much.
But still, it's a kind of dessert. So I wanted to react a little bit to the film by Irwin and the themes that are touched in there. So let's begin by pushing some open doors. Every profession has changed in the digital age, and talking about the future is a thing from the past. In 1993, we were singing Hallelujah for the computer. Sometime later, we were very anxious about the disappearance of the book. And now we seem to worry about the disappearance of the graphic designer. Whether we call this figure a graphic designer, a communications designer, or an information designer, we are talking about the identity of the profession. Oh, I hear somebody talking in my ear. Oh yes, it's Wim Krauw in a speech in 1965. Sorry, Wim, even though you were already then speaking about interdisciplinarity and an all-round knowledge for any designer, you will have to leave because your profession is gone. The identity of the profession has always been a weak point in a business which is concerned with as many different things as strategy, consultancy, service, organization, ordering information, commerce, culture, personal vision, and artistic image making. And even though we have been talking and talking about the future forever, remember the information society, the image culture, visual literacy, acknowledging every time the all-consuming importance of communication and information, the profession of graphic design is still struggling with its legitimacy, whether it is about the highly personal and individual project or about the team player in an interdisciplinary enterprise. The graphic designer is an ambivalent creature, and the nature of the profession is dualistic. There doesn't seem to be such a thing as the graphic designer. The paradox is also information is everything and information is nothing. It's fleeting, ephemeral, fluid, and short-lived. Let me make another observation to put things into perspective and take you to the 1920s. The changes back then were at least as revolutionary as they are now, perhaps even more so. Printing technologies changed. New media, such as photography and film, became available to designers. They were already cutting and pasting in collages and montages, just like today's designers do, using layers and overlapping windows in websites. New visual languages were invented to animate books and create movement. Different media were already then mixed. In the book De Kracht van Typography, The Triumph of Typography, Peter van Blokland has shown how website design, in a way, is essentially not new or different from designing a book. Both have a certain structure within which to work. So yes, changes take place, and by all means, let's keep worrying about the future. But newness is a highly relative concept. Thank you.
Thank Thank you, Frederik. That was, I mean, a very also necessary ending to this evening. So thank you for this perspective. Thank you all guys for being here. Again, please do not forget the Pay As You Like possibility. Check out the programs we have for you in the future, and also keep an eye out for the next edition of It's All Graphic. And we'll see you at the bar. Thank you.